Hello, Ahmed, and you have to help me pronounce your last name again. It's Abojaradeh?
Yeah, that's actually really close. Yeah.
Okay, so how do you pronounce it again?
So it's Abu Jarade.
Oh, Abojaradeh.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's perfect.
that's great. So we have Ahmed Abojaradeh, and you are the founder and currently executive director
Yep.
of Life in My Days.
Yeah.
And I want to know more about your organization and how it's a nonprofit. And on your website, it says the site is a celebration of our experiences as individuals and communities. And it's a space to share, learn, and belong.
Yeah.
So in your own words, what is it all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, it's everything that you just mentioned. So, Life in My Days as a nonprofit is really dedicated to starting difficult conversations in communities. But ultimately, really, its essence is just to build a safe space where individuals can belong, right? And whether we're doing that on the website with the online social change platform, or we're supporting communities to build that safe space, ultimately, it all goes down to belonging. So, and I guess in the briefest of words, really Life in My Days is just supporting building safe spaces where individuals can belong.
Wonderful. I think it's much needed in our world today where there's so many feelings of, searching and how do we belong
Right.
in this ever changing world that is moving so fast, it seems.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful that somebody started this and you started this. Can you tell us a little bit more about your own story and how you came to found Life in My Days?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. So, usually when I start this story, I tell individuals that I've basically lived with mental illness my entire conscious life, really from the age of 2 years old onwards. My very first memory starts kind of with mental illness, and it just kind of continued over the years with different forms of mental illness and so on and so forth. But I didn't know a single person living with a mental illness until I was about 20 years old. And, people hear that and they're like, wait, what do you mean? But you just said that you've lived with mental illness your entire life. I lived with it, but I didn't necessarily have any of the words for it. I didn't have names for any of the illnesses. I didn't have any of that information. And it really wasn't until I was about 20 years old that for the very first time, someone was literally like, no, Ahmed, like, this is real. This is not in your head. This is not you. These are real illnesses that affect far too many of us, and unfortunately we don't want to talk about it. And really that was a life-changing experience for me, because 3 months later I ended up with PTSD. And for those of you familiar with PTSD is, it can come in an instant, right? It's not like a lot of the other mental illness where there's somewhat of a slower progression. With PTSD, it can just literally happen overnight. And that's really what happened to me. I went from being okay to suicidal instantaneously overnight. And really one of the main things that kept me going and really gave me hope for recovery during that time was the understanding that I was not alone,
Mm-hmm.
and that this wasn't me, right? This wasn't something that's wrong with Ahmed. And this was an illness. And with any illness, there is recovery, right? And you can
Right.
definitely live your life in that way.
Yeah.
So that's really where the idea of Life in My Days kind of came from, is that I wanted to build a space where individuals didn't have to end up like me, basically, right? Where, 18 years of mental illness later, that they finally realize that it's not them, that it's a real illness. I wanted to build a space where individuals can share those experiences, and regardless for where they are in the world, whatever their experiences may be, they
Mm-hmm.
be able to connect with one another, and someone can say, you know what, I relate to this, right? I am dealing with the same illness or the same form of abuse or social injustice or whatever it is, but we would be able to kind of see that we're not alone. And that's really what it comes down to it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? That, I mean, like you said, there are other physical illnesses that you can see, and that we're so used to talking about with each other, whether you have as something as simple as a cold,
Right.
or something else that you go to the hospital for and your body is treated for it. It seems like, because it's so physically visible, that we're probably talking about it more, whereas something that is mental, that you cannot literally see, that it's kind of harder maybe to put it into words and to talk about it. And for some reason, there's a stigma attached to it. And I think that goes, across all cultures and across all countries. Right? I mean, it's something that is so universal. And what I find interesting too is that when you talk about it, that you feel like there were not, the right resources for you to come and feel like you belong, or that there are others struggling with some mental illnesses that might be not exactly the same that you're struggling with. But every disease is different for each of us, and we're going through it in a different way. So that's okay. But just the feeling of community and belonging is so important. And I'm really amazed that there's still, even though we're talking about so many different issues and so many different things that we've already accomplished and conquered, compared to, like 20, 50 years ago, when it comes to human rights. But when it comes to mental illness, there's still this kind of conversation that happens, I think, behind closed doors. Why do you think is that? Why do you think we're still so afraid of talking about it? Why are we still so afraid as individuals to talk about it and share our struggles with mental illness?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. And I think it really stems from ableism within our society,
Mm.
right? Whether it's a physical disability or a mental illness, really our society kind of views individuals living with a mental illness or a disability, or really any form of disability, as lesser than. Right. And it's almost like, I remember as I was growing up and everything, it's not that none of these things were never mentioned, right? It's every once in a while something would be mentioned, but it was always mentioned in a really, really negative context, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's especially when it comes to physical disabilities, right? We're taught from the youngest of ages that we need to be grateful for what we have because someone else doesn't have those things, right?
Mm.
So when it comes to our mental abilities, and same with our physical abilities, really there's this huge stigma and this huge perception that you must be less than if you are living with any of these things.
Mm.
And there's almost like an entire separation of, oh no, I'm a normal person, right? So I don't have a mental illness or a disability or anything like that. So I'm okay, right? And
Yeah.
everything underneath that is just, regardless of what the disability is, what the mental illness is, it's a problem. And obviously there's still a hierarchy within that, within our society, but ultimately I think it really stems from ableism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, unfortunately, over the last 50 or so years, and honestly, with mental health treatment in Western societies and really around the world, really, when you look at the beginning of it, right, it was always viewed as like an entirely separate illness kind of thing, right? And that's where we ended up with electroshock therapy and the asylums and all that kind of stuff. It was really, let's separate this from society as much as possible.
Mm.
Right? There's no way this could be a part of us. Let's put it in the background and never talk about it. And I think even today, when we have a lot of mental health events and that kind of stuff, as more communities are starting to talk about it, which is fantastic, but unfortunately, a lot of times we talk about it as if it's like a theoretical thing, right?
Mm.
Let's talk about the symptoms of depression. Let's talk about the symptoms of anxiety, PTSD, but let's never actually discuss the faces of it, right? Who are these people that have this? And, 1 in 5 individuals around the world have a mental illness. But when we discuss these events, it's almost as if like it's this rare form of cancer that nobody's going to ever see, right? Because like you mentioned with the physical illness, right? I mean, even if you had like chicken pox, how many people like know almost everybody else that has chicken pox.
Right.
Or if you have a cold or whatever it is, you know, we have faces for it, right? It's not, oh, it just, you know, this unheard of illness. It's no, my mom had it, my dad had it, my grandparents, my family friend, this random stranger that I don't know.
Right.
And it's really the same way with mental illness, right? Because it's so prevalent within our society, but you don't get that same thing, right? You
Mhm.
don't get that same understanding of, you know, this happens to so many of us. So many of us live with mental illness every single day, and some of us live with multiple mental illnesses, but how many people actually know that, right? And so it does make it challenging. And I think one of the main things that we're doing with Life in My Days is trying to make it as easy as possible for individuals to come out and say these things. And even if they don't want to share their personal experiences, really my idea of belonging and really what we drive for in Life in My Days is that with belonging, it's really being accepted for everything that you are.
Mhm.
And with that comes that you don't really need to tell everyone everything that you are. You just have to feel safe enough and be accepted for all those things. So with Life in My Days, as we talk about mental illness and a lot of these other societal problems, even if you're an individual that doesn't want to share your experiences, you'll know that you're safe here, right? There
Mhm.
are others sharing these experiences. We definitely accept everybody regardless of their experiences. And even if you never share your experiences, that's absolutely fine, because you've been able to find that space where you can still belong. And when the time is right, you can share those things. And we also support individuals in that sense of, let's get you to a place where you want to share. And maybe
Mhm.
you never want to share, right? But let's get you in a healthy enough place where that's an option and do it
Right.
in proper ways.
Yeah. So you have started Life in My Days not too long ago, right? A little over a year ago,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
it's already grown on your website. It says to over 100,000 members.
Yes. It's
That's
so
a
exciting.
Yeah. That shows that a lot of people are actually seeking out that feeling of belonging and wanted to be, you know, around people who are having the same experiences in a way or struggling with the same um, things, right? Why do you think is it that people are seeking out um, something that is founded by someone who has been struggling with mental illness and telling his story so openly, rather than, let's say, going to their family or their friends first?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think there's multiple aspects to the answer to that question, I guess. And so a part of it is that I think one of the main reasons that there is such a positive response to it, I think, is just that we as a society and as individuals, we've been searching for answers for a really long time.
Hmm.
Right? Even when we're told by everyone in society and by ourselves that this is something that's wrong with us, there's still a part of us that doesn't fully believe that, right? Even though it becomes incredibly detrimental when we believe that it is our faults and who we are instead of an illness or a form of abuse or whatever it is, I think there's a part of us that's constantly trying to get us to a better place. And so I think whether we do programs within communities or whether it's an online social change platform like Life in My Days, I think there is a huge interest for these conversations. And I think, unfortunately, we're not meeting that need. Right. And I've seen this with multiple communities all around the world, right? When we do events in person, where you'll have the organizers be like, we're only expecting like 10, 15 people. It's going to be a very small amount. And I'm like, but open it up to everybody. Let's see what happens. And then you end up with 80, 100, 150 people sometimes.
Yeah.
And even the organizers are just so shocked. And I think the reason for that is that we are searching for those answers, and we desperately need to know that we are not alone, right? As human beings, that's really one of the fundamental things that we search for, right? Is connection, is building those connections and having that sense of belonging. I think on the other side of that, one of the other reasons that makes us popular versus going to a family member or a friend is because, unfortunately, still within our society, we don't believe that we can have these conversations. And even within some of the most I guess, progressive communities that are like, yes, let's have these conversations, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're safe spaces where individuals can belong in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's why, and that's actually one of the other reasons that we're so successful when it comes to working with the communities directly, is that it's so much easier for an outsider to come into a community and start these conversations than a member of the community, right? Because there are different stakes in place for members of the community, and you have so much more to lose that it becomes so much more difficult. And so one of the things that we do is we come in and, we test it out for them, right? Of, no, you know what, it's okay to say these things, and work with the community to make sure that they build those support networks to continue supporting the individuals within the community that are struggling with these things, and make sure that they're aware of the things that, make them inherently more ableist, right? And because a lot of ableism and a lot of other systems of oppression, a lot of it is really subconscious,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a lot of times, even people that are interested in these things and they're aware of it, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be safe to individuals with mental illness or disabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same with all other systems of oppression. And so we'll work with them. And that's really why we have that social justice component into what we do, because really without it, you're not really going to solve the problem, right? You're going to talk about it. You might be able to make some changes for a short period of time, but until we really start talking about that subconscious piece more with the social justice and everything that's happened in those communities, you really wouldn't be able to get that. And so I think, unfortunately, we still live in a world where it's incredibly difficult to go to family, to friends, and actually be able to belong, right? And I think one of the reasons for that is that as a society, we don't prioritize belonging, right? I mean, how many times a day or even a month do we hear just the word belonging, right? Whether it's within our families, within our schools, within our jobs, nobody is really doing, putting a lot of focus on, we want everybody to belong. You don't
Right.
really hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think until we start changing that culture, it's really going to still be somewhat difficult for individuals to talk about these things, because it's so much easier to just fit in, even though it causes a lot of problems in the long run, but it's still much easier.
Right. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about how can people join Life in My Days, and then what do you do online on your online platform, and also how do you go out to the communities, and what kind of programs or initiatives are you engaging in?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. So if people wanted to get more involved with us, really they could follow us on social media. They could sign up for our newsletter on the website itself, and they could definitely go and check out a lot of the articles that are on there from, I believe we have close to 35 different writers from all around the world that have shared their personal experiences around topics of mental illness, disabilities, abuse, trauma, sexual assault, and different forms of social justice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a melting pot of all those topics, all in kind of one place. And so people can read all of that. And if they're interested in sharing their own experiences or learning how to share those experiences, one of the things that they could do, we actually have a Belong tab where you could go to our Belong page, and it gives you instructions into how do you submit your work for consideration to be published on Life in My Days. And one of the main differences between us and a lot of other sites is that we don't require you to be a full-time writer or a professional writer, or even like a part-time, like in your hobby writer kind of thing. It's really just anybody interested in sharing their personal experiences. English doesn't even have to be your first language. And so what I always tell people is, don't even worry about making it perfect. That's what editors are for, right? Send us whatever you have about any experience that you would like. And really what we do once we have that is we start a mentorship process where we work with the individuals to make sure that they're sharing in a way that promotes healing and growth.
Mm-hmm.
That way it's not just, here's all my trauma, good luck with it. Then that's not helpful to the individual sharing or the individuals receiving that. And so we make sure that the person sharing is really benefiting from that experience and they're gaining the most out of it. And same with the individuals reading it. And so that usually takes a little bit of time. And then once that's through, we go into the line editing process, and then it gets published. And so that's kind of one of the main options that you have. One of the new programs that we have, and I think we would probably talk about this a little bit later as well, but one of the things that we have noticed over the last year and a half since we started is that the individuals that have shared multiple times have really been the ones that gained the most out of the work that we've been doing. Right? They've been able to take the skills and the tools and the resources that we've provided, and they're able to use it in a way and practice it basically in their daily lives. And so they're able to grow the most out of it. And so that's where the inspiration for our new writing program, which starts in a couple of weeks actually, kind of came from, where we wanted to get individuals from all around the world in one group that are interested in sharing their experiences so that they can learn from one another, and at the same time talk about some of these topics that we really need to be talking about, that influence our story sharing, that influence our lives, and really our belonging in our day-to-day life. And then the third thing that we do is more the community work. And really with that, we work with any community around the world. But one of the main things that has to happen with that is that the community has to reach out to us. And the main reason for that is because, I mean, every single community could use these conversations, right? Mm-hmm. They could all use some work when it comes to building safe spaces, even the best of places, right? We can always grow more and learn from one another. But one of the things that we've noticed is that if it's a community that's coming to us, then they're far more likely to invest in the work. And instead of just doing one event, they're actually more likely to kind of to work with us so that we can support them in building a foundation to continue these conversations. Because really our aim with going and working with these communities is not for me to come and share my story once, or to do one panel or one workshop or whatever it is. It's really for us to support that community, to build that foundation so they can continue those conversations and over time allow them to evolve. Right? So a lot of communities, for example, they might be ready to talk about self-care, right? Mm-hmm. Or stress, right? But they're still not ready about like mental illness. They're not ready for social justice. And so what we do is we support them in building that foundation so that they can get to where they need to go. And we help them in creating their own goals, their own plans, and really just getting them there instead of, we're just going to do this one event and we're done. Good luck. You're on your own. It's how do we really radically change our communities instead of just talk about it.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Let's talk a little bit more about the writing program that you mentioned, because that is starting in a couple of weeks. And I think, as I understand it, it's open to anyone who is interested in joining.
Yes.
And so tell me a little bit more about the program.
Absolutely. So it really took us a while to come up with the exact theme for the program, right? We kind of knew the topics that needed to be provided, but it was somewhat difficult to find just one single thing to fit it all under. In the beginning, we were like, let's do like a 20-word title or something. But ultimately, over the last few months, really the topic that has been coming up over and over and over again, especially with everything going on within our societies when it comes to social injustice, when it comes to mental illness, when it comes to a lot of these conversations, really one conversation that we're really not having is rage, right? And when we kind of started thinking of rage, it became really evident that there was a need for a program to kind of destigmatize rage instead of what we currently have within our society of that rage is always bad, right? If I, as a Muslim man, say I have rage, all of a sudden I'm viewed as a terrorist. If you're Black and you say you have rage, you're an angry Black man, and so on and so forth. And with more intersectionality, it becomes even more difficult to talk about the topic of rage. But unfortunately, rage builds every single time there is any form of injustice, right? And really a lot of the topics that we discuss on Life in My Days, and really what drove me to create Life in My Days, really were those forms of injustice, were not being able to belong, right? That rage that was within me, and I wanted to build something positive with it and give back to society. And so really there are so many ways to express that rage in a positive way, but because within our society we're not allowed to talk about rage at all, we don't get to that level. And so this program is really a program about rage, And so it goes into identifying where that rage is coming from, right? Let's talk about those forms of injustice that build it. Let's talk about how those injustices affect our mental well-being and other aspects of our lives. And then let's talk about expressing rage in a positive way, right? Let's do community building, relationship building. Let's write in a positive way. Let's do spoken word, art, really any form of medium that individuals want to express that, those emotions in. We want to support them in that. But then we thought, okay, so that's really a response to how society is today. And really one of the things that we wanted to do is we don't want our work to just be a response all the time. We wanted to actually take a step above that. And let's go to something where we're actually building, not just as a response, but also because we as humans deserve to build, a love ethic community, sustainable lifestyles, to grow, to gain autonomy, to gain self-actualization. And so the program goes into those topics as well. So we'll also be covering topics such as emotional intelligence, relationship building, community building, living a sustainable lifestyle, a love ethic, all that kind of stuff, all in one program. And one of the cool things that we did for this program is because for the writing portion of it, we really wanted to keep the group as small as possible. Even though we had interest from a lot of individuals, we really wanted to keep the group at a pretty small number. That way, that group themselves, when they build their own kind of community within that group, it would be much easier instead of having 100 different people. Then it's much difficult. And so, but one of the things that we wanted to do is still offer these same topics in webinar style to individuals all around the world that might not be able to commit 4 months of their lives and that might not be really ready to take charge of their life and to support their communities in that way, right? But they are still interested in learning, let's say, about what is rage, or maybe they're interested in community development and movements. But they're not interested in some of the other things, or they don't realize that they need those other things. And so we're also offering that where individuals can sign up for each individual webinar and attend those, which we're actually working on finalizing the page on the website for that. And so soon you'll find a tab for the writing program on there and the webinar program. And you can go in there and you can sign up for all of the different webinars. And again, that's outside of the writing program slightly. And so if you're a part of the writing program, you wouldn't have to sign up and all that kind of stuff. You would automatically be a part of all of those sessions.
I see. Okay, that's great. Let's just tell people again because we haven't mentioned the website URL yet. So it's lifeinmydays.com.
Yes, it's just lifeinmydays.com. And with our social media, it's just Life in My Days.
Okay, so people can
really
find
easy to find.
Great, great. Last question. So how can people support you, right? People that see this and say, wow, we really love what Ahmed is doing, Ahmed and his team. You have a team behind or your nonprofit too.
Yes.
So how can people support you if they want to, let's say, make a financial donation, or if there are other ways to support you? How can people do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you would be able to do all of that on the website. And one of the greatest things about Life in My Day is that from the very beginning, even when it was just a side project, it was always supported by amazing individuals from all around the world, right? Whether they were sharing our articles, sharing the website, whether they were contributing, or whether they were contributing financially, really, we wouldn't be able to do any of the work that we do without that financial support and the support of individuals from all around the world. So if you go on the website, you can either make a one-time donation, you can make a recurring donation, you could support our work by sharing our content, by telling others about us. Really, there's so much that you can do, and all forms of help and support really make such a huge difference. And actually, one of the things that we're going to be launching in the next couple of weeks as well is a fellowship program. So we're going to get a few different individuals that are interested in supporting us in specific areas, whether it's organizational development, whether it's social media and branding, whether it's just creative branding, And so hopefully in the next few weeks, you'll find those up on the website. And so you would be able to apply to those. And basically what we try to do is that even though a lot of individuals are like, yes, we want to support you, we're like, fantastic, but we also want to support you. Right. And so with those fellowships and everything, even though those individuals would be supporting us, but we also want to make sure that they're getting where they need to go, and we're supporting their growth as much as possible as well, and giving back to our community, regardless of, whether they're sharing articles, whether they're writing article, whether they're, financially supporting us. We want to make sure that we're also supporting the communities.
Well, that's great. We'll all go to the website and check it out. Yeah, good luck with everything. Good luck with the writing program, and we'll certainly stay in touch. And I hope everybody will check out Life in My Days, lifeinmydays.com. And thank you so much, Ahmed. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. This was great. Thank you.